Welcome to another session of the CEI Book Club by the Climate and Environment Initiative at RSIL. Today we have the pleasure of being joined by Ms. Rina Saeed Khan. Rina Saeed Khan is an award-winning environmental journalist based in Islamabad. She is currently serving as the chairperson of the Islamabad Wildlife Management Board that is in charge of managing the Margalla Hills National Park in Islamabad. Rina began her career in journalism in 1992 at the Friday Times, where she served as a features editor till 1998. From 1998 onwards, she worked as a consultant in communications with UNDP Pakistan and WWF Pakistan. She completed her BA from Grinnell College and her MA in Environment and Development from SOAS London as a Chevening Scholar. She has received international awards for her writing, including the Earth Journalism Award in Copenhagen in 2009 for Best Reporting on Climate Change in Asia. In 2016, Rina co-authored a book on the environment in Pakistan titled Water in the Wilderness, Life in the Coast, Deserts and Mountains in Pakistan. Her second book, From Mountains to Mangroves, Protecting Pakistan's Natural Heritage, which is the topic of our discussion today, was published by OUP in 2017. Thank you so much for being with us today, Rina, and over to you for your general comments on the book.
So this book is actually a labor of love. And the seeds for this book were planted by all the articles I did for the Friday Times, because when I came back from college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I did know that I wanted to do my master's, but it was a liberal arts education. So I wasn't sure what I would focus on. So I joined the Friday Times because I like to write. And one thing Grinnell taught us was how to write properly. So I joined the Friday Times as a journalist, and we did a lot of work in the old city on heritage issues and all these beautiful buildings that were being torn down, all these, Havelis. And so we were, that's how I started writing about heritage and, about what was being damaged and destroyed. And then a friend of mine said, would you like to write about these smokeless stoves? And I didn't know what they were. And so she said, it's a UNDP project, and we're having a workshop in Lahore, and would you like to attend? So I went there and I did an article about these smokeless stoves, with proper chimneys to help women in rural areas, because the smoke comes into their house and then it's really bad for their health and for the health of their children. And so it was a very simple technology. They were mud-made chulas, they call them. And in fact, they taught the local women how to make them, and they were so low cost that they could go from village to village. And, it's a very low technology project. And so I wrote about it, and the UNDP liked the response, and they liked the fact that, it was published in a weekly, a very popular newspaper at the time, Friday Times. So they asked me, would you like to travel with us? And would you like to do more about our projects? And, but it would be mean traveling outside Lahore. So I said, okay. So I was excited about the fact that I could actually travel across the country, aside from Karachi or Peshawar or the usual cities. And they said, well, some of these areas are quite remote. And a lot of their projects were on wildlife and protecting wildlife. And there was a small grants program called the Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program. And in fact, the lady in charge, Majibeen, she said, well, I travel to a lot of these remote areas, and it would be nice for you to come along and we could share the room. And because a lot of these places are not really easy to access. I mean, there's no a hotel there as such for us to stay, but they're rest houses. And so I started traveling, and I think the next place she took me to was to see the Indus dolphins in Sakhar, at the Sakhar Barrage, which is an Indus Dolphin Reserve. And there's a chapter on the book about the Indus Dolphin Reserve. And that was the first time I saw the Indus dolphins. And they're blind because of years of evolution, like centuries of millennia of evolution in the muddy waters of the Indus. So they no longer need their eyesight to navigate. They use radar. And so that was very fascinating to be on a boat early in the morning, this rickety wooden boat on the river Indus, and then to see the dolphins for the first time, and you can hear them before you see them, and then they jump out of the water. It's just fascinating. And the sun was, it was early in the morning, and there's lots of fog on the river. So it was just surreal, and it's just so fascinating to be able to see just how much, so much biodiversity and our rich heritage, natural heritage that we have. So from built heritage to natural heritage. And of course, I wrote about it and as a feature story. And I think the story was just, it became very popular, and people started, teasing me, oh, the blind dolphin. You went and saw the blind dolphins. And so this is for people living in the cities and who are not, don't have, can't travel as much. And so and then they were like that, well, this is not the only endangered species Pakistan has. There's so many others, like the Suleiman markhor and the snow leopard. And they were like, would you like to see more? And so I was like, sure, because it was such a fascinating trip for me and such an eye-opening experience. So someone who'd been, brought up in Lahore and then traveled just abroad for college in England, or later on England and the US, and being exposed to all this. So I started traveling quite a bit, and that's how I kept doing these. They were called center spreads in those days. So it was the middle part of the Friday Times. So you had the 2 pages and then 1 mop page. So it was photographs and a nice layout, and it really caught the attention, I think, of a lot of people. And so I kept traveling and kept doing these center spreads and learning more about the projects. And then the UNDP, then the lady in charge of the project said, we should actually write a book about all the successful stories that the UNDP has, the projects have now. I mean, there's a long history of the small grants program. And so we wrote a little book called Green Pioneers, and it was published by the UNDP, but it was written it was produced in a format of a report. So, like a dry report, and all these NGOs, and especially these international NGOs like UNDP and then WWF, they keep producing these reports, which are very good for internal, to document the internal work, but it never really gets read by the outside world. And, and then this is the years before Twitter and social media and before Facebook. And so the book kind of disappeared and it didn't really make an impact. And so she said, later on we should do our own book and we should get a proper publisher, and it shouldn't be in a reporting format, and it should be like a coffee table book. And so hence we worked on this other book before my book, which is called Water in the Wilderness. And that was like, it took about 10 years to finally write it, and we traveled quite a bit. And so I had stories, background stories from that book, and then I had my own features from earlier for the Friday Times. And so while we did the Water in the Wilderness, which is again a very, I thought a kind of an academic approach, and it turned out to be a beautiful coffee table book, and we had an amazing photographer. But I wanted to do something very in easy language and very journalistic and not too long for the younger audience, because I was like, all these kids are growing up and they're going to start traveling across the country, because by then, we had that war. Well, I mean, when I was out in the field, we went through this terrible time of the war on terror, and, there were all these bomb blasts, and you really thought twice before you could travel anywhere. And so I thought, okay, once the war on terror sort of starts dying down, and young people might want to start exploring their own country and seeing for themselves. And so this book was kind of like a guidebook for them. And initially I thought I should include rest houses, where to stay, but then there are other books on that, and the other sort of, by then social media was very active. And so I thought, well, nobody actually explores these places from an environmental point of view. And so I'd like to stick to that, because that's really my forte. So then in the end, I decided to do it more from a environmental point of view. And basically I was just inspired by the fact that from 0 meters to the top of K2, which is 8,611 meters, I think Pakistan has the most diversity in terms of the altitude changes. And I think probably the only country in the world which has such dramatic and drastic changes in altitude. And that means different ecosystems, different wildlife, and just amazing, amazing biodiversity. And that's what WWF Pakistan, one of my mentors, Richard Garstang, that was his mantra. And he kept saying that this is really, geographically, Pakistan is probably one of the most unique countries in the world. And we never see it from that angle. And so I wanted to capture that as well. And that's why I called the book From Mountains to Mangroves, meaning, from the alpine, the top of K2 all the way down to sea level, where you have mangroves, and then the mountains, high mountains. And that was my, so I selected about, I think, 20 stories, and the stories that were probably the most interesting. There were, many, many more places I went to, but I had to, obviously, I didn't want a very thick book either, because I wanted, like, young people don't have that much sort of like, I know that, attention span is, so I selected, I think, 20, and out of those 20, in the end, I think 16 stories that were really like, I think stood out for me as well in terms of my travels. Like, they were the most fascinating places I had visited, the most memorable ones, and the ones with the most unusual biodiversity, the green turtles, the leopards, and the Chilgoza forest, and the Suleiman Markhor, and then of course the salt range, just a stunning part that we just drive through on the motorway and we don't realize how old it was under the sea millions of years ago, and it was pushed up, and then hence you have the salt mines over there, and then Manchar Lake, and then of course Kinjar Lake near Karachi, and then the Indus Delta, and the story that I did that I got an award for, Miracle at Katie Bandar. So it was a collection of all my stories, and it came out in 2017. So it's been now quite a few years now. And I didn't really, I didn't market it too well, but it did, at the Karachi Literature Festival, Lahore Literature Festival, there were sessions, and I did kind of launch it there as well. That's because OUP, Oxford University Press, published it. But I didn't really, it didn't work so hard at the marketing. It's still available at OUP, and I still get lots of messages and emails. And now, of course, on Twitter and social media, I get responses for it. And so people do read it still, and give me feedback on it. And maybe I should do another edition, because it's been a while, and climate change is really impacting all these places that I visited. Even Punjab, I was really surprised, because when I had first visited Punjab like 15 years ago, the whole area was covered with glaciers, and there was a lot more, even though it was a month of, like, I think, almost May or June, it was still covered with snow. And then I went back 15 years later, and the glaciers are gone, and then there was so much tourism, and there was like biryani trucks on Khunjarab Pass, which is quite shocking, in a parking lot. So I wrote about that in one of my articles, that biryani at 15,000 feet. Like, what's the need for this, and why are we doing? And it's supposedly a national park, and why are we allowing this sort of activity? Because after eating the biryani, the tourists were just chucking the plastic litter. So there was actually, they were making a landfill site. Imagine at 15,000 feet, they were making a landfill site just to clean up all the garbage and the litter they left behind. So all these places are being slowly, and, I guess they're changing, and they're not going to remain so pristine and so beautiful. And it's sad, because I kind of wrote the book so that people would become more aware of these places and do more to protect them. And I think this past government did with the Protected Areas Initiative. They did recognize that a lot more national parks need to be made, and that the existing ones need to be strengthened and better managed. And so we were going in the right direction, but let's see what happens now in the future. So.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that's upsetting, considering the current situation with climate change, is that perhaps this book will be quite different from people's experiences in 10 years. So even while I was reading it, some chapters were so interesting to me, because they were places that I had visited as well. And it really felt like I was transported back to that experience. And it wasn't as though I was reading these long articles or very technical writing on the environment. It was that story of how you went there, your experience. But at the same time, I was thinking, these places are changing so rapidly because of development. I'm not sure whether the next generation is really going to experience them in the same way that we've been able to.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sad part, that the purpose of the book was to highlight just how valuable these places are, and just how special they are, and how they need to be protected. But the opposite has happened. They've just become more popular as tourist places. And unfortunately, the kind of tourism we have, which my board member at Islamabad Wildlife Management Board calls it rush tourism, and that's what it is. It's rush tourism. People just come in a hurry, and then they don't really appreciate or savor the place, like as a more thoughtful person might do, and somebody who's more environmentally conscious, and it's just, sightseeing, and it's like, oh, okay. And then they sort of, litter, and then they have a huge environmental footprint, and they just don't bother. And the local infrastructure is also, it's all about cementing it and parking lots and making it easy and making money from the tourists. I understand the local communities are impoverished and this is a way of them to make money too, but it's just really sad that we do not have proper what we call ecotourism in other countries, especially in the West, and that concept has not really become functional in Pakistan. I don't know why. I mean, we just and these are well-off people, people who can afford car. I mean, Khunjra Pass, you can't just trek over there. You need to you can cycle there, but these are people coming in SUVs and big cars and from all over the country who have the money, and unfortunately are just I don't know how else to, and also it's the management as well, right? I mean, it's a national park, and there should be better management and better, stricter rules and stricter, surveillance and people. Why are they allowing a biryani truck at 5,500 feet? I mean, who's allowing it? Somebody has given them permission to come here. So I mean, the fight, I mean, this is the same fight I have in Margalla Hills National Park, but I'm in charge of it. And this is something that there's something I can do about it, but there's enormous, influential people involved who are extremely powerful. And so it's always it's a constant fight that, climate change is hitting us. These are the lungs of the city. I mean, it's the only green area that, slowly our population is also out of control, right? And I understand that, the population of Islamabad is growing, and there's need for more development and housing and roads. But at the same time, you're sacrificing the quality. I mean, your air quality. You're sacrificing your, you're destroying your green belts. You're destroying your green areas, and then you're eyeing the national park area because that's all that's really left now. And it's only 17,000 hectares. It's not a huge park, and then literally people are eating chunks and chunks. It's residential encroachment, it's commercial encroachment. I mean, we've had a long-standing fight with a restaurant that is completely illegal, which is inside the park. And the man is just so well connected and so influential that there's not, there's a high court order right now that it should be shut. But then who's going to implement it? I need help to implement that order, right? I don't have the authority myself. I mean, we are the custodians of the national park in terms of Margalla Hills National Park is supposed to be managed by Islamabad Wildlife Management Board. But then when it comes down to the rules and the regulations, and we don't have authorized officers on the ground. So, so it's easy to say, okay, why don't you go and take charge of your park? But when it comes to rules, and then our new act, Islamabad Nature and Wildlife Management Act that we've drafted, and it's been lying with it was sent to the last government, but it still hasn't been passed. So we are defanged, and so it's a huge fight. And then I met the forest officer on the other side of the Margallas. There were huge fires this year, forest fires, and so he was saying this. I mean, but in his case, because he's a proper KP forest officer, he does have the authority, and now he's moving in. But the damage has been done. There's so much collusion on the ground level that, so much of what he was explaining to me is that's Guzara Forest. Guzara Forest is community-owned forest, but the rules are very clear that land use cannot be changed within a Guzara Forest. So you can't sell it to anybody and change the land use. And yet huge tracts of Guzara Forest have been sold. And now he's busily, he's really, really trying his best to reverse it by, raiding the areas and actually taking land physically back from the encroachers. But it's a problem across the country. You have that our green areas and our national parks and our forest areas, our habitats for our wildlife are shrinking, because our population is growing, and people are just grabbing land whenever they can, using money, influence, or just even the local villages, their villages are growing now. So you have a village inside a forest and they're having kids and the kids are having kids, and then they're grabbing more and more of the forest land. So, I mean, really, I think one thing I realize is our population is just, we have to control our population. I mean, it's just out of control, like how, I mean, we don't have enough resources. Even now, right now, we just don't have enough resources. And where do you, and I think it's a problem all over the world. It's not just confined to Pakistan. It's just that the planet is getting the more and more people on it, and we have less and less resources, and we're living beyond our carrying capacity, the planet. And and then you have the fossil fuel problem, then which is, Pakistan is not a high emitter, it's less than 1%, and yet we're one of the countries that are suffering the most. And you can see it this year with the extreme heat wave, which started in March, and now we're in we have this flooding going on. So from heat waves straight into flooding, and then all this is going to get worse and worse because where the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has warned us that 1.5, try to stick to 1.5 degrees of warming, which is the global average temperature, and we're already at 1.2. So you can see all the devastation that's happening now, and there's no caps on emissions right now, and the Paris Agreement is still not being enforced. So we are not in a good place, and the thing is that adaptation is the key. So we as a country that's highly vulnerable to climate change, we really need to be adapting. And that's that's the argument I have, is that let's save these places. It's not just these beautiful places for wildlife, but it's to save ourselves too, really. I mean, from the worst impacts of climate change. And in fact, we not only have to save these areas, we have to expand them as well. And we have to prevent, basically humans are the worst, I think, species on the planet right now, because they're the ones who are doing the most damage to the planet. And so, you have loss of biodiversity, because when you eat up these habitats, where does the wildlife go, So, and we have to find a way of balancing, our lives. We have to find a way of living in balance with nature. But there's just so many enormous, like I said, vested interests, and it's it really does come down to greed, and people are greedy as well. I mean, they want a better life, and if they can grab a land or plot, or convert it and snatch forest land, or turn it into a restaurant, or what do they care? They'll do it. If they can put a biryani truck on at 15,000 feet, they will do it. So, and even Shandur, I wrote about Shandur Pass, and it's this beautiful pass that I think it's at 12,000 feet, and it's between Chitral and Gilgit, and that's where the famous Shandur polo tournament takes place every year. So, but yet the tournament is, I mean, it happens every year. It was huge this year again. I think they had a break for COVID, but yet again, nothing has changed. I mean, the garbage is still there after the tournament, and I mean, it's been years, and still there's no proper management plan. And again, after the tournament, the scavengers come from the nomads who live nearby, and they come and they take whatever they can recycle, and the rest is just buried there until next year. And there used to be a lake there. There still is a lake there, but the migratory birds have long gone. So so I mean, it's sad in a way that everything that was even recommended by my book, and I don't think much action has taken place. And the Kalash tribe, I mean, I've written about them as well, and how these awful floods came, and even this year, again, Chitral is being flooded right now. And I don't know if the Kalash are in particular affected, again, because it depends on which valley it is. But I wrote in the book how I was so surprised and shocked to see Bamburat, which is like the most, have you been to Bamburat? It's the biggest valley, the three, Rambur and Birir and Bamburat. And so after many years, when I went back to the Kalash valleys and I went to Bamburat, it was all swept away. Most of it was swept away. And there was just a rickety road, a jeep track. And I couldn't even recognize it, because there used to be a proper main road of Bamburat, and there were hotels. And so it's affected the tourist industry as well. I mean, a lot of the hotels were just swept away, and they're still suffering. They still live in fear of flash floods and bluffs and Glacier Lake outburst floods. And so the Kalash the landscape has changed, at least in Bamburat Valley, and same with Rambur as well. And then going down to Palas Valley, I haven't been back, so I don't know the latest. It's still a very remote corner of Kohistan, and I did read recently there was flash flooding there, and that's also flash flooding it increases when there's deforestation, and they're like very old deodar. Deodar is this very slow growing species of tree and they had been cutting the deodar trees because they are really prized because it doesn't decay the wood. And so in construction or in furniture, deodar is like the most expensive wood there is. And they had been, even when I visited the area, and now it's been like over 10 years, they had been cutting the wood. And just recently I read just a couple of weeks ago, there were massive floods in Kohistan. So I'm sure the deforestation is continuing. And we can move on to like Ayodhya is, I haven't been back, I think before COVID I went back, and it's a better managed national park. It's better managed, but there is a problem with the poor leopards, so the leopards, there's a lot of human wildlife conflict there, but I haven't heard any reports recently, so maybe it's slightly better now, the situation on the ground. The Chilgoza story is really sad because there was a huge fire this year and 40% of the Chilgoza forest was burnt to the ground, and the local livelihood was really affected because the local people, they depend on the Chilgozas, right? Because they call it the black gold and they sell it for very high. I mean, if you try to buy a packet of Chilgozas in the market, I think it's like 1,500 rupees for a small packet now. And so they were exporting these Chilgozas to the Middle East, where there's a huge demand because Chilgozas that are grown in that are found in Pakistan are unique. They're not really pine nuts. They are called Chilgozas. It's a subspecies, and they're extremely sweet, and their taste is they're very flavorful. So they sell very well. And so these were the largest stands of pure Chilgozas in the world. And 40% has burnt down because of this horrible fire and this heat wave that struck the country. It's going to become a food security issue for the local people because they're dependent on they borrow in March, April from the shops and all that. And then they pay back once they sell the Chilgozas, and now they won't have that kind of harvest to sell. So I think IUCN is stepping in, and maybe the food program, the World Food Program, and they'll make sure that at least they get enough food that they don't starve this year. And it's just, again, it takes about 20 years for a Chilgoza tree to mature. So they are going to start plantation immediately and all that, but it's going to be a big hit to their income. And, you get used to the income, your children are studying in better schools, and, and now suddenly that income is gone. So that's really sad. And it was caused, they identified it was probably these nomads who were, lit a fire inside the forest, and it somehow went out of control because it was so dry and there were no rains, and the fire spread out of control. And so it's really sad about the Chilgoza forest. And the juniper forest, I haven't been back to, but there was already a disease within, and these juniper forests, I mean, some of the trees are over 1,000 years old. So the really old ones were kind of dying anyway because of some, they said it's part of the natural phenomenon so I do know that IUCN again wanted to have it declared a biosphere. There was talk of having it declared. So I don't know the latest, whether they did manage to do that, but there is a lot of funding for it. And should I stop now, or do you want me to continue with the
No, this has been great. I did want to ask a couple of specific questions based on the things that you've written in these chapters. And this has been a great overview of what you saw and what you've seen since then. I did want to ask about the Palas Valley. And so you mentioned how the inhabitants there have always had a close connection with their environment, but as a result of these pressure factors, like needing to feed their families, find livelihood because unemployment is very high in that region, they've been forced to deplete the natural resources in the area. So I was wondering if you could just describe that a little more, and maybe if you've seen any conservation methods that really tackle this while recognizing that we need to protect the local communities and provide them their basic necessities, as well as providing protection for the environment.
So Palas is a bit of an unusual place because it's a tribal area and they don't like outsiders there. So it's very difficult for NGOs to operate there. They have huge trust deficits. And so they will, when I last, WWF Pakistan had made some inroads because they're one of the oldest environmental NGOs in the country. And so they had, and there was one particular, in fact, Rab Nawaz, who's now sitting in Islamabad, he's one of their senior directors. He spent a lot of years in Palas Valley, really cultivating the local contacts and addressing like the local people, and so he managed to build up this trust, and they were emphasizing what they call NTFP, non-timber forest products. So walnuts, and then they also had some chilgoza trees, and then the mushrooms and the other medicinal plants that grow within the forest. So that was I think the thrust was that, protect your forest, try not to sell your timber, in fact, rely on what is grown in the forest, which is so special and so unique and so valuable in itself. And we can help you market those products, So I do know that a lot of pharmaceutical companies, because it's moist temperate forests, and moist temperate forest has a lot of medicinal plants. And by now, and even in Swat now, medicinal plants in the moist temperate forests are being, harvested, and pharmaceutical companies pay a lot of money for these cough syrups, and they form the basis of a lot of medicines. So there is an active market there, and of course chilgoza, there's also a huge market for chilgozas, and walnuts, of course, and so you have all these products that can be sold and are being sold, and so it was all a matter of connecting them to the markets and going. It was a middlemen that were basically what we discovered was in Job, it was always a middleman, because the chilgoza forest owners would harvest the chilgoza, which is a lot of hard work, really going up these really, really difficult mountains and climbing onto the trees and then harvesting. And then they would sell it to the middle person who would make the money and not give them that much of a profit. And so they managed to, that's what WWF did. They tried to connect them directly to the markets so that they wouldn't have to go through the middle person. And now with, better roads and social media, and you have your telephones, and everybody has a mobile phone in this country. There are more mobile phones than there are bathrooms and toilets, apparently. So now it's easier to connect directly to your, in the market. You don't have to go to the middle person. You can access, you have the roads to go straight to town and start marketing them. So that's been happening, which is really, really positive, because these are very valuable products that are within a living forest. And I think poaching has been controlled somewhat. And I mean, I know that, for example, in Margalla Hills National Park, there's minimal poaching now. I mean, unless it's right at the remote corners of the park, but we've stopped it. And so wildlife trade is now decreasing, and the wildlife departments are more active. Sindh is very active, we're active. Punjab is starting to become more active. Azad Kashmir has become more active. However, KP Wildlife is actually a very, very strong department. So they're very active on preventing poaching, and the KP Forest Department is actually a very, very strong department as well. In Sindh, you have mangroves. And actually, that's an underreported story, that Sindh's mangroves are actually, they have more mangroves now than they had 10 years ago. It's one of the fastest growing, and they grow very fast, the mangroves. So a lot of plantation took place on Sindh and the coastline, and that's a success story. And that's what I wrote about in, my story on the miracle at KT Bandar, how I came back and you could see the greenery, and how the Indus Delta, and the Indus Delta is, as you know, it's dying because there's more and more seawater coming in, and sea level rise bhi ho raha hai, erosion bhi ho rahi hai. There's less and less water in the Indus River. The Indus River doesn't meet the sea anymore. So it's retreating. The river is retreating, and the sea is going into the delta. So hence the devastation, because it's all salt water. And but there's certain species like Avicennia marina. It's a species of mangroves, and it thrives in salt water. So you can still grow different species of, I mean, instead of having 7 or 8 species, you can be restricted to 1 or 2, but still you can still grow them. And that's what's been happening. And that's it's a success story. So So yeah, I mean, I think I'm going off the topic now. So any next questions? So.
So I absolutely agree that when you have strong institutional support, then you can really see the effect of the efforts that are made. Because I recently visited.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted
Yes.
to add the mangrove forest is also beneficial for the local communities, because that's where the shrimp grows, you know, that's where you have the crabs and the shrimp and the small, I mean, the roots of the mangroves is where it provides a habitat for all this marine life, which you could then market and export. And so it's good for the local community as well. It's a win-win for everybody, you know.
Mhm. And so I recently visited a UBR National Park, and I noticed how active the management there is with protecting the park. But I did, in my mind, have this question that now they're very specific about what area is within that park. And of course, at one point, that area belonged to the local communities who live there. So I was wondering whether you noticed this tension between local communities and the management of areas when you make them into protected parks, and how we can really deal with that.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a tension. I mean, that's why Khunjarab National Park for years wasn't managed properly, because the local people were like, we have grazing rights, you have no right to throw us out of the park or not allow us access to, you know, our yaks and our goats. And so that's a problem in every national park. You know, how do you balance the needs of the local people with the protection of the park? And then I think the last government did find a way around it, was that, you know, you hire the local people to become the protectors. So you do your recruitment from within the boundaries, near the villagers that live near the boundaries, and you give them jobs, and then you enable them to become the protectors. You train them, and that's what we do in Margalla Hills National Park. We try to recruit from the local community. I mean, I would say 40% of our staff is from the local communities, and there are 32 villages living within the park. So we try to recruit them, and then we train them, and then we try to make them proud of, you know, like, you are now like not just guards, but you are park rangers. And, you know, we give them a proper uniform, we give them, and now we recently, you know, we've sort of given them, not, we did our recruitment online using the government job portal, and these are properly recruited government jobs now. So we've just recently started that. Initially, we were hiring on contract. So, you know, the sort of the dignity of having a government job with all its safeguards and the pension and everything, and that's really motivated these young people to now want to join. And there's a long, you know, every day we get calls that, you know, can we join? How do we become, or if we can even become a volunteer, or if we can just do an internship. And so that's really amazing that, you know, young people want to be part of this effort, and they want to learn about wildlife and protection of our resources. And I think that's the future, that all, you know, these villages have young children, and they're growing up, and they need jobs. And that's what, you know, the concept of green jobs, that's where the government can really step in. And you know, instead of getting outsiders to come, hire the local people, train them, build their capacity, teach them about you know, natural resource management, and really change their mindsets. And then they go back to their houses inside the villages, and then they tell the other villagers, listen, don't hunt, or don't do this, it's wrong, you know, it's not right, because we're damaging our own resources. So that's where it starts, you know, this awareness, and we can be part of it.
I think, like, as a nation, when we build this common conscience that we are the protectors of the natural heritage in Pakistan, then we're really going to get better outcomes for the environment, for wildlife, for biodiversity. And I wanted to ask, as my final question, if you've noticed the impact that your environmental journalism has had on building that conscience.
I see it amongst younger people. You know, I think, like, really, I think climate change is something they're growing up with. I don't think it's a matter of like, if it's going to happen, it is happening, and it's impacting their lives. And I think the media has done a great job in Pakistan, outside international media. Everybody's done a great job in highlighting the issue. And you have young activists like Greta Thunberg, who's inspired an entire generation of, you know, young people, and like teenagers and older people, older generation in their 20s and in their teens about the perils that they're going to grow up in a very different world, and and they are growing up in a very different world, and by the time they become adults, they will not have the privileges or the kind of lifestyle that we had, because it just won't be there for them anymore. And it's actually quite scary. And I think young people realize that the science is very, very clear. It's the same science. If you read the IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, it's the same science that more or less, and it's just become more and more clear to them. But they've been ringing the alarm bells for like more than 10 years now. And governments have been waffling, and it's because it's the nature of, political appointees, right? You're only worried about your 5 years of election. You're elected, you have 5 years or 4 years term. You don't really think long term, right? You want to extract the most you can in those 4 years. And so I think young people, I think, are the ones that have been the most inspired, the most interested. That's the feedback I get from the emails, and then travelers who were visiting Pakistan, who read my stories, who want to go to these places and they want to see it for themselves. And so lots of, now we don't get as many international visitors as we used to, but so that, I think my target audience has been always younger people, and I'm glad. That's why I wrote the book. I actually wrote it for the younger lot. I didn't really write for my generation, because I think we're part of the problem. We're the ones who didn't really do as much as we could have, and we took things for granted, and just leaving behind a terrible, terrible legacy, and like we're just leaving behind a mess, I think, for the younger lot, and it's really sad. I feel really bad for them, and I think but I'm going to see it in my lifetime. It's already happening, so it's not like we will be spared either. It's already starting to happen, and we're seeing it, and I think Pakistan, there's just too much instability right now, political instability, and we've taken our eye off the ball. We're having these horrible floods and these heat waves, and the whole country is just obsessed about politics and who's going to be, empowered to do what. Is this, power for the sake of power? Are you going to use that power to do good then? So I hope it's resolved soon. And I think the last government, was going in the right direction. I think they recognized that climate change is, they took some leadership role, and they were being recognized internationally for it. The billion tree tsunami, or the 10 billion tree tsunami was being recognized, and our Pakistan's leadership role was being recognized. And I hope that this continues, because it's not just talk. You want to see action on the ground, right? You just don't want to hear, okay, oh, we need to plant more trees, or we need to do adaptation, or we need to bring in electric vehicles, or we need to switch. Yes, but what are we doing on the ground? We need proper, solid projects on the ground, and adaptation projects. Mitigation, like I said, we're not a high emitter, but yes, we should respect the Paris Agreement that we've signed on to, and we should do what we can as well. And we should, for our own economy's sake, we should rely less on fossil fuels, right? And they become more and more expensive, and especially with this war going on in Ukraine, and that's why it's also impacting us economically. But we really need to adapt, and we really need to, sort of have projects on the ground to help the most affected communities, to, whether it's right now southern Punjab, which is the most affected, or Balochistan, which is the most affected. We need to do it from the grassroots level, like when you meet the delegations, when I go on these international negotiations, you meet the delegation from Bangladesh. And, they told me that, of course, we still have cyclones in Bangladesh, but we become cyclone proof, because over the years, we have such good preparation now that no one dies and no one loses their livestock, and no one loses. So we realize that the most important thing you need to save are your children, your livestock, and your utensils. And of course, any savings you have. So they have these proper cyclone shelters that they build, and they have a proper early warning system. And right down to the school child, they know what to do when a cyclone is approaching. So they said, we become the cyclones come and they go, and of course they're damaging, but we don't lose livelihoods, and we don't lose lives anymore, and we know how to prepare for them. So this is what and this is something that we can also start doing. Okay, we don't have the cyclone issue, but we have the flood issue, we have a heat wave issue. We need to start preparing and not be reactive, but be proactive. So we know what to do, and the government has to take the lead, and so hoping for the best. Let's see. So thank you so much
for joining us today. And I would really recommend to our audience to take a look at the book, read about some of the areas that we discussed today, visit these areas yourself. But if you do visit, try to be as careful as you can to protect this natural heritage. And please tune in for our next session as well. Thank you.
Thank you.